A man stood in rags at the edge of a glittering mansion, his daughter's small hand trembling in his. He carried a basket of fruit, not as a merchant, but as a father desperate to buy one more day of survival. Laughter poured from the party inside, a world of gold and glass where fortunes were flaunted and poverty was mocked. And in that moment, when he stepped forward hoping for mercy, he was met with cruelty. Fruit spilled across marble floors, the crack of a hand across his face, his little girl crying as security dragged them out like criminals. Guests turned away, pretending not to see. Yet hidden in that humiliation was a truth no one expected, because this man was no ordinary beggar. He carried a past so extraordinary it could topple dynasties. This is the story of how a forgotten billionaire ended up on the streets, only to be exposed in the most unexpected way. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why was a man once worth millions living on the streets, reduced to begging with his daughter at his side? What chain of betrayals forced him from boardrooms into back alleys, from tailored suits into torn rags? And why, on that very night, did he walk into a mansion where the richest families of the city gathered, clutching nothing more than a basket of fruit? His humiliation was captured in moments, but behind it lay years of secrets. A man who was once respected, envied, and powerful was now dragged through the dirt in front of strangers who thought they knew his place in the world. But who is this beggar really? Why did he choose that party of all places to step inside? And what shocking truth was about to be uncovered? A truth that would change the lives of everyone who witnessed that night. Years before the humiliation at that glittering mansion, the man now known only as a beggar was something entirely different. He had not always carried fruit baskets down crowded streets, nor worn shoes that barely clung to his feet. There was a time not too long ago when his signature was enough to move millions, when his presence commanded respect in boardrooms across the city. He had built his life from the ground up, an empire carved not from inheritance, but from sweat and determination. He had once worn pressed suits, shaken hands with politicians, and appeared in newspapers as a symbol of success. But as the headlines later revealed, it all vanished, suddenly, brutally, and without explanation. To the public, it seemed like he had lost everything in a storm of bad decisions. Yet those who knew him best whispered of betrayal, of trusted partners who carved up his empire and left him with nothing. And when the empire collapsed, so did his world. He disappeared without a trace, leaving even his closest associates wondering where he had gone. In the present, the man stood unrecognizable. His wealth had dissolved into thin air, and with it, the comfort of friends, family, and status. He had only one companion left, his daughter. She was young, yet her eyes reflected hardship far beyond her years. Day after day, she walked beside him through the markets, carrying baskets heavier than she should, watching her father negotiate for pennies. For her, there had been no childhood of toys or luxuries, only the daily struggle of survival. And yet, she remained at his side, loyal, devoted, believing in him when the world had turned its back. Their bond was unspoken but unbreakable. To him, she was not just a daughter, she was his reason for enduring humiliation, his anchor when the tides of life had dragged him to the bottom. But every story of downfall has another side, one that stands in stark contrast. And on the other side of the city, in houses wrapped in glass and steel, lived the children of power and privilege. Among them was the boy who would soon become central to this tale, the rich Brat whose arrogance was whispered about in every corner of the elite circles. He was the heir to one of the city's largest fortunes, born into a life the beggar had once known but had to fight for every step of the way. Unlike the beggar, this boy had inherited everything. Wealth, power, and influence were not earned. They were delivered to him on a silver platter. And with it came arrogance, a careless attitude toward those beneath him, and a reputation for recklessness. While others worked to protect their family's honor, he squandered it on indulgence and cruelty, believing himself untouchable. It was inevitable that these lives, one defined by loss, the other by privilege, would collide. What no one could have predicted was how violently that collision would happen. A father trying to shield his daughter's dignity, a girl whose innocence was about to be crushed before strangers, and a spoiled heir who thought the world belonged to him. None of them could see the storm approaching, but the night at that mansion would bind their stories together forever. The night of the party was unlike anything the beggar and his daughter had seen in years. Outside the gates, cars gleamed like polished jewels, each one worth more than the sum of everything the man had ever owned. Music drifted from the mansion, light spilling across manicured lawns, and laughter rang out from within. It was a celebration of wealth, a display of power by the families who believed themselves untouchable. But beyond the glow of chandeliers and champagne glasses, the beggar and his daughter stood in the shadows, clutching a basket of fruit as if it were their only ticket into that world. His clothes were worn, patched in places, and his shoes left dust where polished marble awaited. His daughter held tightly to his hand, her eyes wide, not with wonder but with uncertainty. She knew they did not belong there, and yet she trusted her father's determination. For him, it was not a matter of choice. He had to try. Step by step, they crossed the threshold into a place where they were never meant to stand. Inside, the contrasts were striking. The mansion glittered with gold, chandeliers swaying gently above tables of crystal glasses and silver platters. Guests wore diamonds as though they were trinkets, their laughter sharp and careless. The beggar's clothes looked almost alien in this world, his daughter's shoes scuffing against polished marble as they walked quietly toward the crowd. They carried no invitation, only the fruit they hoped to sell. To the man, it was a chance at dignity, a hope that among the powerful, someone might still remember kindness. To his daughter, it was another night of silent prayers that someone would look at them not with pity, but with mercy. It did not take long before they were noticed. Eyes turned, whispers followed. The sight of a ragged man with a child in tow carrying fruit through a sea of gowns and tuxedos was more than unexpected. It was offensive to those who believed their world should remain untouched by the poor. Some turned away, pretending not to see. Others stared openly, their lips curling with disdain. But one among them did not merely watch. He acted. The boy, the rich brat, heir to a fortune he never earned, stepped forward with the confidence of one who believed himself a king in his own palace. He smiled, not with warmth, but with mockery. "What are you doing here?" His voice carried across the room, laced with contempt. The beggar bowed his head slightly, offering the basket forward with trembling hands. His words were simple, almost pleading. He spoke of fruit, of selling enough to buy food for his daughter. But before he could finish, the brat reached out, and with a careless flick of his hand, the basket was overturned. Fruit spilled across the marble floor, rolling beneath polished shoes. The guests gasped, then laughed, their amusement echoing through the hall as if cruelty were entertainment. The beggar bent quickly, gathering what little he could, his hands shaking, his face burning with humiliation. His daughter knelt beside him, tears brimming in her eyes as she tried to help. The brat only laughed louder. He leaned down and, with deliberate malice, slapped the beggar across the face. The sound cracked through the room, silencing some and thrilling others. The beggar's head snapped to the side, but he did not raise his hand in return. Instead, he pulled his daughter close, shielding her with his body, refusing to let her be touched by the cruelty of strangers. His dignity was shattered, but his instinct as a father remained unbroken. Around them, the guests' laughter resumed. Some whispered behind gloved hands. Others shook their heads as though watching a performance staged for their amusement. Not one stepped forward to defend him. Security moved in quickly, rough hands seizing the beggar by the arms, dragging him toward the doors. His daughter clung to him, crying out, her small voice drowned beneath the music that resumed as if nothing had happened. They were cast out like intruders, their presence erased from the glittering night. But what the guest did not know was that humiliation is a double-edged sword. For while most turned away, satisfied with the spectacle, one man in that room did not laugh. He did not whisper. He stared. His eyes followed the beggar as he was dragged across the marble floor, his daughter's cries echoing in the hall. He looked harder, longer, and recognition sparked. The ragged clothes could not hide the face he had once seen in boardrooms and newspapers, in meetings that shaped the very industries these guests now celebrated. The man realized who the beggar truly was, and that moment of cruelty, the slap across the face, the fruit scattered across polished marble, would not be forgotten, because someone in that room recognized the beggar's face, and the truth he carried was about to come crashing back into the lives of those who thought they had buried it forever. The humiliation at the mansion should have ended the night quietly, erased by music and champagne. But it did not, because among the crowd, one wealthy guest could not shake the face he had seen. He had recognized the beggar, even beneath the rags, even through the years that had passed. It was the face of a man who once stood at the center of industry, a businessman whose empire had touched every corner of the city. And yet, he had vanished. No obituary, no explanation, only silence. For years, rumors swirled, whispers of bankruptcy, whispers of betrayal, whispers of a man swallowed whole by the very system he once controlled. Now here he was, dragged across the floor of a party where once he would have been the guest of honor. That recognition did not stay a secret. Within days, the story spread. Headlines resurfaced from old newspapers, photographs of him in his prime standing beside men of power, reports of a sudden financial collapse that never fully made sense. Articles that had once been forgotten were now thrust into the spotlight again. Business tycoon declares bankruptcy. Sudden collapse of empire raises questions. Mogul vanishes without a trace. Questions that had gone unanswered now returned with urgency. How could a man of such stature vanish so completely? And how could he now be found living as a beggar, carrying fruit with his daughter at the edge of survival? The media seized the story with force. News anchors spoke with disbelief. Billionaire found living as beggar. Images of the party circulated, grainy footage of fruit scattered across marble floors, of the slap heard by dozens, of security dragging him out while his daughter cried. Outrage followed swiftly. Commentators demanded answers. The public, moved by the sight of a father shielding his daughter in disgrace, rallied around him. Sympathy flooded in. Donations were offered, strangers demanded justice, and in every corner of the city, the name of the rich Brat became a symbol of arrogance. But as the story grew, so too did the questions, because the narrative of bankruptcy was not enough. Too many gaps remained, too many details unexplained. The fall of his empire had been too sudden, too final, too clean. Investigators began pulling threads, piecing together the timeline of his disappearance. What they uncovered hinted at something far more calculated. Business partners who once called him a friend had walked away with fortunes. Contracts had been altered, signatures disputed, assets transferred in silence. And when the dust settled years ago, he was left with nothing. Erased as though he had never existed. The public wanted answers. They wanted to know not only how a billionaire became a beggar, but who had profited from his ruin. The humiliation at the mansion had ripped the veil from years of silence, and now the world demanded the truth. Yet what the headlines did not yet reveal was that his downfall had never been a simple matter of financial loss. It was not bankruptcy alone that had driven him into the streets. It was betrayal, calculated, deliberate, and cruel. And as whispers of betrayal surfaced, it became clear that the story of the beggar and his daughter was not only one of poverty, but of power stolen and lives destroyed. But the true reason he vanished wasn't bankruptcy, it was betrayal. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the picture became. The beggar's downfall had not been an accident, nor the result of careless mistakes. It was orchestrated. Documents uncovered from years past revealed contracts that had been signed in his name, but not by his hand, transactions that drained accounts without his consent, and boardroom deals where loyalty was betrayed in exchange for profit. Business partners he had once trusted, men who had eaten at his table and called themselves brothers, had plotted against him. Piece by piece, they stripped his empire away, leaving him powerless. What the world had seen as a sudden collapse was in truth a carefully executed theft, and while his enemies grew richer, he disappeared into silence, abandoned by those who owed him everything. But it was not only the investigation that brought his story back into the light. The night at the mansion, the humiliation that should have been forgotten, became the spark that reignited his name. A guest had captured it all, the fruit spilling across marble, the slap, the tears of his daughter, the security dragging them away. That video spread with a speed no one could control. Millions watched, outraged by the arrogance of the brat, and moved by the dignity of a father who shielded his child even in disgrace. News outlets replayed the footage, social media echoed with condemnation, and for the first time in years the world spoke his name again. He was no longer invisible. And for his daughter, who had known only hardship and shame, something remarkable began to unfold. She watched as her father was not mocked but defended. She heard strangers speak of him not as a beggar, but as the man he had once been. Slowly, piece by piece, the man she had believed forgotten was restored before her eyes. The father who once stood in the shadows was now recognized for who he truly was, a man who had been robbed, betrayed and erased, but not defeated. It was the beginning of an emotional return, a reunion between the past and the present. A daughter who had never seen her father in his true identity now watched the world remember him. And as his name echoed again in headlines, as truth began to surface, the story that began with spilled fruit and humiliation was transformed into something greater. As the truth spread, silence could no longer protect those who had betrayed him. The recognition of the beggar as the man he once was forced the reopening of legal investigations that had long been buried. Prosecutors revisited the documents, lawyers retraced the paper trails, and slowly, the conspiracy unraveled. Those who had stolen his empire were no longer safe behind their walls of wealth. One by one, their names were dragged into the light, their reputations questioned, their fortunes threatened. And through it all, the father who had once been mocked stood no longer as a beggar, but as a man reclaiming his place in history. For his daughter, the change was almost impossible to believe. The world that had once turned its back now opened its doors, recognizing not only her father's name, but the suffering they had endured together. What had begun as shame became vindication. The man who shielded her in disgrace now stood before cameras with dignity restored. As for the brat, the boy who had mocked him at the mansion, his arrogance became his downfall. The viral video that exposed the father's humiliation also exposed the heir's cruelty. The public's outrage was relentless. Business connections severed ties, his family's name was dragged through scandal, and the power he believed would always protect him crumbled under the weight of disgrace. In the end, it was clear. The true shame of that night did not belong to the beggar, but to the boy who had tried to humiliate him. And so the story closed where it had begun, with a man and his daughter, walking not as outcasts, but as symbols of endurance. His fortune had been stolen, his dignity stripped, but both had been returned in ways his betrayers could never erase. In the end, the man they mocked for being a beggar was worth more than all of them combined, not just in wealth but in dignity. But one question remains. How many more forgotten billionaires walk among us, hidden in plain sight? If you were in his shoes, would you forgive those who betrayed you, or would you fight back until every last truth was revealed? What would justice look like to you, mercy or revenge? Before we end, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because stories like this remind us that behind every headline is a life, a struggle, and a truth waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe for more beautiful stories.